I met Robert Woodson actually about a year and a half ago, and we've become good friends since then. And he is the founder and president of the National Center of Neighborhood Enterprise, and he's often referred to as the Godfather, and quite understandable with a mustache like that. And he is the godfather of the movement to empower neighborhood-based organizations. And Mr. Woodson's social activism dates to the 1960s, when as a young civil rights activist he developed and coordinated national and local community development programs. For more than 30 years, Mr. Woodson has been a source of guidance and support for grassroots organizations around the world. A fabulous, wonderful man. Please welcome Dr. Robert Woodson.
Good morning. Good morning. I see my 10 minutes, and I believe if you can't trust someone with your time, you can't trust them with your money. So I want to be respectful of that, because I want to hear what questions you have. But the civil rights movement was used as a context in which we are having these deliberations. As a veteran of the civil rights movement, you will know, and many of us know, that the quality of that movement was the content of the debate inside of that movement as to the direction in which it would move. There was tension between those who believed in litigation and those direct action. And as a consequence of this tension, the movement was able to propel forward in different ways. Also, Dr. King said that the highest form of maturity is the ability to be self-critical. And that if you want to go someplace you haven't been, you got to do something that you haven't done. Or as my grassroots people would say, if you keep doing what you do, you keep getting what you got. And so I would hope that a part of our deliberations, we would think carefully about our actions, because what we do at the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, we believe if you want to convince people as to the correctness of your principles and of your doctrine, you must demonstrate that they produce a superior life. Jesus did not rely upon sermons. Jesus cured, he fed, he did things to demonstrate the efficacy of his principles, and then he taught you to say, look at what we've done, I have done, and what it means to you. What we do at the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise that I founded 31 years ago is that we believe in what one of the founders said, and I'd like to just read that and then go into the details of it. He says that this is what Samuel Adams wrote in 1779. A general dissolution of principles and manners will more surely overthrow the liberties of Americans than the whole force of a common enemy. While the people are virtuous, they cannot be subdued, but when they lose that virtue, they will be ready to surrender their liberties to the first external or internal invader. If virtue and knowledge is diffused among the people, they will never be conquered. And what that lofty statement means to me is that if it's not enough to change this nation by talking about the superiority of our doctrine or our principles, we must convince the American people that as a consequence of adhering to these principles and to this doctrine, that our lives can be improved. So what we do at the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, we're guided by a principle that I found and I've written about in my book, The Triumphs of Joseph. In the book of Genesis, I looked at what is the relationship between the powerful and the rest of us. And I found it in the book of Genesis, in the book of Joseph. As you know, Pharaoh was a powerful man, but Pharaoh was an interesting leader because he had the uncanny ability to dream bad dreams in good times. Very few powerful, influential people have the ability to dream bad dreams in good times because they are just overwhelmed by their power and their influence, and they're blinded to the realities of the future. But this Pharaoh was different but he sought solutions when he asked those around him who looked like him and shared his values and his experience and about these troubling dreams. He did something that very few leaders today can do. He looked outside of his racial ethnic group and looked for answers among the downtrodden. He found it in the person of an uneducated Hebrew inmate that was in his prison.
Yes, sir.
But it was an unknown slave that said, a servant to Pharaoh, that said, "You must seek knowledge and insight from this man in that dungeon." And you know, they cleaned Joseph up, and they came before Pharaoh and told him to bow down before the god Pharaoh. And he refused, even at the risk of his death. So Pharaoh knew what? That Joseph had integrity. If he won't lie to save his life, then I can believe him.
Yes.
And so he told him, you know the story, there'll be 7 years of famine, followed by 7 years of plenty. Save up 20% and appoint an overseer. He was not job hunting at the time. And so Pharaoh appointed Joseph. And together they say that they fed and triumphed for 500 years until there arose a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph. What we do at the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise is go into low-income neighborhoods and look for the Josephs of this world. Look for the people that are in poverty but not of poverty. Look for the people who were prostitutes but through the grace of God had become transformed. People who were gangbangers but through the grace of God had become transformed. And then there are those who never rode on a stolen bike. There are those who were in those communities but not of it. They were raising families that were not dropping out of school or in jail and drugs. And so we go in there like a Geiger counter and find out who they are, what they are, put microphones in front of them, let them teach us how they have become redeemed when everyone around them had not. And they become a source of new knowledge, new wisdom. And what we must do, like the Pharaoh of old, is take the resources that Pharaoh had, put them at the disposal of the Josephs. Because Joseph and Pharaoh, their relationship was not a religious one. See, we don't have to recruit people based on our faith, but the secular consequence of our faith is what convinces most people of the validity of your faith.
Yes, sir.
And so what we do at the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, we go around and cast a net. For 2 years, we went into low-income, crime-infested neighborhoods, and we let people know we weren't there to try to exploit your incapacity or your problems. We don't want to know what the problems are. We want to know what the solutions are as defined by you, as evidenced by your work, your actions. And then what we did for 2 years is capture all of these experiences, these, I call them social entrepreneurs. And then we brought them together and then helped raise money so that they can begin to expand that influence. It seems to me that today in America, if we are to prevail, we must leave the church. We must leave our conference centers. We're not going to prevail by having conferences alone. We must go out and cast a net, as we have done in the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, and go into those communities and bring them, grassroots leaders, to tables like this. Yes. Put microphones in front of them and said, how were you able to transform 2,000 people who were drug addicts and prostitutes? Shirley Holloway, that we did in Washington. How were you able to then take this woman who's now married to a man who was a former drug addict, and together you now own a home and have a business going in that? How did you do that? And we must go around. We are now in 14 communities, 14 schools in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, with our remedies, because young people are influenced by people who evidence they have been transformed because of people are role models for them who've been there. And so what we have done at the Center for the Enterprise is something I commend to you, is we must be able to go out into these troubled neighborhoods, bring people together who have been able to develop solutions, find out from them what kind of managerial needs that they have, what kind of material resources that they need. Join in common community with them. Last week, I brought 25 of my top grassroots leaders together to Washington, D.C., where we met with members of Congress. And for 2 days, they just shared their life-transforming remedies to people. The qualities that make these local Josephs effective also renders them invisible, because they're not whining and complaining. They're not protesting. They're not looking for you. You have to find them. And once you find them, you must partner with them like Pharaoh in the Bible and take what is working in 10 communities and expand it to 100 communities, so that if we were to convince the American people of the validity of the American virtue and the rightness of our faith, we should be able to fill an auditorium or stadium with 10,000 transformed drug addicts, prostitutes, and people. And then when the people say, tell me, does your faith make any difference? Do what Jesus did. Point to the evidence of it and say, you tell me whether this works. And grassroots people, I end my book, The Triumphs of Joseph, with that blind man in the book of Matthew, when the scribes and Pharisees came to him and said, is he the Messiah? Is he the Christ? And he says, I don't know. If all you men, you bright, intelligent, with these robes on, are asking me, a humble man, is he the Christ? All I can tell you is I was blind and now I see.